Hello and welcome once again to Red Gaming Tech. My name is Marta. Today is the 15th of September and I have something a little bit different for you today. As the creative director and writer of Naughty Dog, who goes by the name of Neil Druckmann, has expressed some opinions on how AAA developers can learn a thing or two from the indies, especially in the way that characters are portrayed in games. Now, basically what this video is going to be is I'm going to give you what he said, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions, not just on his opinion, but on the general idea that AAAs need to pay attention to how storytelling and characters are done in games. So, this was when speaking with GI International, and Neil did say that he's been particularly impressed with some of the storytelling techniques independents have been using, especially Gone Home and Papers, Please, both of which he was blown away by. And he said, quote, "With big AAA titles, it's sometimes hard to make these gigantic shifts as far as what a game is, what kind of story it could tell. As more and more examples come to light, I think people are pursuing better narratives, and I hope criticism of games and game narratives is becoming more sophisticated. I think before you would have had a hard time talking about tropes and how women are represented in games, or how characters of colour are represented in games. But now, I'm kind of excited by the discussion and the kind of criticism games are getting. I think that change is going to happen much more rapidly going forward, and people who don't engage in that discussion, who don't try to appeal to audience that are coming on, are going to be left behind. I feel like AAA games, we're on the cusp of at the very least seeing strong, non-sexualised female protagonists starring in games. You're going to see a lot more of those, a lot more that are commercially successful. And he also feels that in many cases AAA devs feel they need to play it safe due to there being so many parts of a giant corporation when releasing a game, and of course it makes you less willing to take a risk because, well, you may have stockholders or something like that breathing down your neck. But he said, quote, "But once you have enough evidence to say, hey look, this is actually not a risk, this can succeed commercially, then creativity can flourish and new avenues can be pushed." So there you have it, his thoughts and opinions, and I have to agree with his sentiments, and that AAA developers have a lot of pressures on them, because obviously when you're dealing with a big budget AAA title, the key words in that sentence are big budget, and the fact that cost for most AAA games is only rising. Games can cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, especially when you go to the higher scale. I mean, there are some exceptions to the rule. For example, Metro Last Light, how the team worked and the conditions that they worked in, and how to basically develop the game for a fraction of the cost that it should have been developed for, is pretty much widely known now, but I don't think every developer should start making their employees work with parkas and gloves on because that's how cold it is in the office. Obviously that's a pretty extreme example, but you get my point. It's just an exception that proves the rule that it can be done for a cheaper budget, but usually obviously you can't do that for various reasons. So what can AAA developers learn from indie devs? Well, I feel like storytelling is something that they can really learn from indies. Let's take an example that I have praised quite a few times now. A game by the name of Bastion, which of course many of you have probably seen or played at this point. It is a very, very good game indeed, lauded for its excellent gameplay and storytelling. Now, storytelling is something that, in my opinion, should be shown and not told when it comes to character exposition, world exposition, and some of that kind of stuff. Obviously, some of it has to be told to you in certain ways, but showing is always better than telling, at least in my opinion, when it comes to expressing the world, expressing your characters, and expressing your story. And in that particular game, obviously, the character never ever speaks, and all of the world growing, all of that exposition that's happening of filling you in on what's happened and all of that, it's all being shown to you through the world and through the excellent narration that's done throughout the game. And of course, let's take for another example, Thomas Was Alone. Now, that is a game that features squares, rectangles. Basically, literally, it features pixels as characters. They're not even slightly human, they are just shapes. And yet, because of how the game is presented to you, because of the excellent narration and how it is done, you end up attaching personality and feelings towards blocks. Which is mad when you think about it, but it is so excellently presented that that's just how you feel. You feel an attachment to something that, by all rights, you shouldn't feel an attachment to. Like if someone draws a square on a piece of paper, for example, you don't suddenly start naming the square and then, imagining its square family or whatever. And yet, in Thomas Was Alone, that's exactly what it does. Now, the thing is with big AAA games, I'm not saying all of them do this, obviously. I'm giving examples of what they tend to do, not what all of them do. Obviously, as Neil Druckmann very accurately pointed out, the paradigm is shifting a little bit, but we're still seeing a lot of things where story is given to you in cutscenes, in big chunks, and it's just shoved in your face, and then you move on to the next combat set piece or whatever. And that's not really good storytelling, in my opinion. Story should always be given to you. Yeah, you can have cutscenes of conversation or whatever, but it should never just be say, here's some exposition, here's some explanation, pew pew pew, more gunfighting or whatever. That's not very good storytelling, at least in my opinion. Personally, a story should be always given to you every minute in the world. The world itself should be giving you little pieces of information about how its people live, your character's interaction with it, the little things that the world represents. For example, I don't know, like when you walk down any street in your home country, you don't notice it obviously because you walk past it every day, but there's no one saying to you, well, this land was built, this city was built in this way, and then this happened, blah 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 blah. But you can see the marks of everything that's happened and how the city is, how people live, and all that good stuff. And that's essentially what a living world should be in a game. It should be a living world. It should not just be a world that you pass through and then occasionally exposition is chucked in your face. Now, having strong non-sexualized female protagonists is something that we all want, I feel. And obviously we are seeing a shift in that slightly, which is definitely good because, well, if games ever want to be taken seriously as an art form, which is a discussion that I was having previously in my Hotline Miami video, then, we need to stop with this whole thing. Obviously, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a sexy girl in your game or whatever, but let's not focus on that. Let's not say, hey, look, boobs, that you're going to buy our game because it has boobs in it, right? Because that's what a lot of the overly sexualized female characters are for. They're not there for their character, they're there because, boobs, basically. So I definitely want to see this move towards non-sexualized female protagonists in games. And I feel like that AAA developers are definitely paying more attention to what indies are doing. And the more success that indies see, the more attention AAAs are going to pay attention to them. Because obviously we've had a lot of runaway hits in the indie market lately. We've had, of course, Amnesia, and the sequel, Amnesia Machine for Pigs, just came out, and that's definitely going to get people talking with the story, and I'm going to do a full review on that very, very soon. So, we've had loads of hits recently. The list goes on, and a lot of the things that we like about these indie games are something because it has things that you're not going to really find in AAA games now, because they've got those big bosses to worry about. They've got millions of dollars riding on it. They've got their stockholders going, we want you to sell X amount of games, or we're going to blah blah blah. There are a lot of pressures on AAA developers. Let's not forget that. Indie developers are more free because usually it's just a small group of people who want to make a game, and they have no restrictions to their vision other than budget. But the lack of budget often forces them to be more creative, and I feel like that's the key. But AAA developers, I'm not saying they can't make indie games. Of course they can. They can make indie-style games. They can take lessons from them. I'm just more speculating on what I think that AAA developers need to pay attention to the most in indie games, and I feel like that is characterization and storytelling. Because, well, I'm not saying that AAA developed games can't have a good story. That's absolutely ridiculous. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the indies tend to tell the story in a very different way to how AAAs do. And now I'm not saying that every AAA should tell a story like an indie game, but there are definitely things to be taken away from the showing versus telling method that most indie games do, and the unusual storytelling methods and characterization methods that we see, and all these quirks that makes these games unique. That's definitely something we need to be seeing, and I think we are definitely seeing more of that. We're seeing more new ideas come out recently than we have in a long time. We were a little bit stagnant for a while in a lot of these AAA games, but I think we're finally moving away from it, and I think that the success of indies is definitely to do with that. So let's hope that the indie market sees yet more success, and given that both the Xbox One and the PS4 are both heavily supporting indie titles, I think we're going to see a very interesting time for gaming ahead of us. We'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this though. What do you think that AAA developers could learn from indie games, whether it's a specific game or just indie games in general? I want to hear some feedback from you guys. I mean, you know my thoughts and speculations and all that good stuff, and I want to hear some opinions from you guys, and I may even do a second video if we get a good enough response and we can get a good discussion going. Anyway, that is me done for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.